Hello, everyone. Welcome for welcome. We'll just wait a few more minutes to see if we have a few more folks to join us. We'll start officially at 7:05. Hello, good evening. Thank you all for joining us for this important forum tonight on the rail trail. My name is Amanda, and I'm on the steering committee for Indivisible Santa Cruz County. During this discussion, we hope to answer a lot of questions that we and many of you have about this incredibly important issue that we are voting on this coming June 7th. Ballots will be mailed out mid-May and will include many other important upcoming local issues. Our format this evening will allow our presenter to give a short 20-minute presentation, followed by almost an hour of questions, ending around 8:30. We hope that this format will allow us to take a deeper dive into the rail trail issue. We also wanted to acknowledge that we did not invite a representative from Greenway due to the negative interactions many of us have experienced both in similar forums and other online platforms. We do not feel that this type of dialogue is productive and tends to devolve quickly, and we hope that our format will help to break some of the dense amount of info down on this 20-year-long issue. A few logistical notes. We have disabled the chat for the webinar and are using the Q&A feature only, so please put your questions in the Q&A as you have them. Please feel free to submit your questions there, and we will try to get to as many as possible in the time allotted. We also want to note that anyone spamming the Q&A will be removed from the meeting. We encourage and love to engage in productive dialogue, but will not tolerate any harassment. We are all volunteers that put this event together, and we have given up our personal time to do this and to organize this. Since we have not invited someone from Greenway, we want to provide resources from them as well as No Way Greenway campaign in hopes that you will continue to do your own research about both sides of this issue. The resources will provide ways to get involved with each campaign, whether you leave here in support or opposed to Greenway. We will share the resources in the chat a few times over the evening to No Way Greenway, Friends of the Rail Trail, Measure D, which is the actual ballot, Greenway, and the RTC, along with other resources. Within the next week, we will be sending out a follow-up email to everyone that registered, along with a link to the recording of this forum. I would now like to introduce Mimi, who will be introducing tonight's speakers. Thank you.
Hi, it is my great pleasure to introduce Sally Arnold. Sally is a retired teacher, one whom I had the pleasure of working with for many years in the Soquel School District. I knew Sally as an intelligent, dedicated, well-informed, and passionate teacher. She brings these same qualities to her advocacy work, which is extensive. Currently, Sally serves on the Campaign for Sustainable Transportation, the Stakeholders Group for the County Active Transportation Plan, Transportation Committee of the local Sierra Club, the Bicycle Advisory Committee to the Regional Transportation Commission, the Friends of the Rail Trail, and the No Greenway Campaign Committee. We are thrilled to have someone of Sally's knowledge, experience, and integrity present to us tonight. With that, I will turn it over to Sally.
Hi, thank you so much for having me tonight. And it's such a pleasure to be here with some people I've known Mimi for decades, and Pauline and I have gotten to know each other through transportation work, and then meeting some new people through Indivisible. I certainly respect the work that Indivisible has been doing over the many years since they formed both nationally and in the county. I have a slide presentation I'm going to share, and it basically covers some of the general history and how we got here, and then what the situation is right now, and in the county on this issue. And then we'll, sorry, I'm having a little technical difficulty here. And anyway, and then we will take questions and answers. So, as Mimi listed, there's a lot of organizations who are working right now on the transportation in general and the Rail and Trail project in specific. And I want to just clarify that, Friends of the Rail and Trail, FORT, is an educational and advocacy group. This is our 20-year anniversary, and we've been working to both, advocate for the acquisition of the rail line, and then for the building of the trail, and for fixing up the tracks for transit. That's been a 20-year mission. No Way Greenway is a very recent formation. It's just to try to stop this ballot measure that is trying to derail, can't resist those rail puns, the Rail and Trail project that's been in the works for so long. So this is the No Way Greenway project is just, going to be in existence until June. And it's really got one purpose, and that's to defeat this anti-transit initiative. So a little bit of history. I think we all know that the rail line was built out in the 19th century when rail lines were being built around the country. And this was done kind of under the auspices of the federal government, because it was designed to help connect the country for both passenger transit and for freight. Because of the early introduction of the rail near the coast, our development in Santa Cruz County is along the coast. And today, half our population lives within a mile of the tracks. We have 92 parks and 44 schools within a mile of the tracks. And actually, between the west side of Santa Cruz and Aptos, we have urban densities similar to Oakland and Portland. You would think, we think of our county as being kind of rural. We've got the mountains and all those trees, and we've got all that ag land on the north and south end of the county. But in that center around the tracks, we are really a small city. And that is one of the reasons why rail transit can be so powerful for our county and be very successful. Of course, we know that the vision, we're living today with that broken 20th century vision of transportation, which was more highways, more individual cars. And we know what the problems are, right? We've got the less expensive housing is in Watsonville. We've got the educational and economic opportunities in Santa Cruz. And in between, you got a 90-minute traffic jam. And this is the people who are really bearing the brunt of this are the working class people of color in Watsonville who are stuck in that traffic. And that the time they are spending stuck in traffic is time they're not with their families. They're not caring for children or their elderly relatives. They're not involved in community activities because they're spending an hour and a half each way sitting in traffic and polluting. And there's Aptos residents too. It's not as long for them, but a lot of Aptos residents are stuck in that same traffic. And we also have another problem, which is safety. We have a very high rate of bicycle commuters in this county, actually the second only to Davis in the state. But we have a very high rate of serious injury and death in the county as well. And so we really need safe places for people to cycle, people to walk, scooter, all the things they're doing that are not in cars. And, pedestrians, we're all pedestrians eventually, you get, even if people who drive a lot, eventually you get out of your car and you walk somewhere. And then, I alluded earlier to all the pollution that is the result of this, 90-minute traffic jam. And, locally, over half our greenhouse gas emissions are climate related. Our greenhouse gas emissions are transit related in our county. And that means that if we seriously want to address our local climate emissions, we need to do something about our transportation emissions. And this is where electric light rail. So we, as the community, bought this rail corridor. And over the last years, the Monterey Bay Scenic Sanctuary Trail Network Master Plan was developed and was approved by all the local jurisdictions, including the Coastal Commission, which is not easy to get sometimes. It's the project of record for our county. And you can see in the photo on the right, an example of exactly how it's designed to work. You have some clean, quiet light rail on the tracks. You got a bike trail right next to it, and people can safely move either way. And the bike trail becomes also kind of a possible solution for the first and last mile issues that any transit project has, that no public transit delivers you right to your door. And that's where the trail can really help make a safe travel to and from the transit stops. So you can see there's a plan. You can see on this map, there's 32 miles between Watsonville and Davenport. And the plan is basically to build the trail first, and it's under construction. We'll talk about that. And then to add light rail just between Santa Cruz and Watsonville, because there's not that much action north to Davenport. And then to have buses connect to the transit stops so that if one's destination is not within walking distance of the tracks, one has another transit option to get kind of deeper into the county away from the coast. And then of course we need to make the streets safe for all kinds of personal mobility, whether it's walking or biking or scootering. We all need to have safe ways to move around without a car. And this is a kind of a complete vision called Coast Connect. Fort sort of founded the vision, and many organizations and community groups and businesses have signed on because they see how those pieces together really will work to improve quality of life in our county in a lot of ways. So the trail is being built, and that's really great news. We've got the San Lorenzo Trestle that was built in 2019. It came in under budget and ahead of schedule. The West Side segment was finished in 2020, and it's a huge success. Those of you who might be West Siders know it's totally changed the way people move around the West Side. And it has been, we've got about 600 people a day using it, and that's on weekdays. It's even more on the weekend. And then there's been a segment in Watsonville that's been finished, and it connects many of those slough trails. So it's providing a kind of a loop recreational trail right now that is helpful for the people in Watsonville. And there's a lot of interesting work being done in Watsonville to increase pedestrian mobility and public transit there. And then there's segments that are going out to bid. So segment 7B, which is the one that goes from Bay, California down to the wharf. It kind of goes parallel to Bay Street, but at a much gentler grade. It's an ADA accessible 2% grade that will connect the west side down to the wharf. And that's going out to bid right now, and it'll probably start construction like in the fall. And that is going to be a really interesting change for people who live in the beach flats, because instead of having to struggle up steep Laurel Street, which is also very, it's got a seep. So in the winter, it's very slimy and slippery and steep and narrow and dangerous traffic. They'll have a nice wide trail to connect them directly to Bayview Elementary, which is really important for all those kids who live in the flats. The North Coast segment that goes from Wilder Ranch north to Davenport is designed, it's fully funded. The Federal Lands Access Program is going to fund it, and probably construction will start there in 2024. There's a whole series of segments right now from Seabright, or really from the river mouth across Seabright, Live Oak, and to State Park Drive in Aptos that are currently in environmental review and design. And there's some public hearings that you can go to if you want to see the designs and see the discussion about what that's going to look like. But when you think about what that's going to connect, that's going to be amazing. There's Seabright, of course, itself. There's the Boys and Girls Club, Simpkins Swim Center, the Live Oak Schools, Capitola Village, and several state beaches, all going to be accessible by trail. It's going to, again, revolutionize the way people move around the east side. And we're really excited about that trail finally coming to fruition. One thing I've learned about these projects, transit projects, or really any infrastructure project, there's years and years of work that go into it that are behind the scenes that nobody sees. And unless you're like a total nerd and attending all these planning meetings, like some of us I could name. But anyway, that by the time the shovel hits the ground and you actually see something happening, that's just a tiny piece of all the time that went into the project. And so, a lot of work has gone into getting to this moment, but and you can see some of that behind the scenes design work now if you go to those public workshops. You can go to the RTC website to see links about that. So why rail and trail together? Well, it's because bikes and trains really work and play well together. And transit planners actually have a phrase for that. You can see from this graphic in the upper right, it says bike, train, bike. Sometimes they call it BITY-B. And they have found that when they build bike infrastructure with train infrastructure, that more people get out of their cars, more people ride their bikes, more people ride the train. The bike basically solves your first and last mile problems that any transit project has. And you can roll it right on and roll it right off, and away you go. They found in when they built the SMART train in Sonoma Marin, that they immediately had to add extra cars because so many people were bringing their bikes on the train. So they had to actually increase capacity right away, which is one of the nice things about transit, rail transit, is that you can have one car with an engine, and then you can just add on to that, and you still just have one driver. It's really easy to scale up, and it's much less expensive to scale up because of that. And of course, rail transit provides the dignity of independent boarding that people in wheelchairs or walkers or strollers will really appreciate. And that's why the Elderly and Disabled Transportation Advisory Committee to the RTC has said they support the rail and trail plan together. I meant to say when I was showing the pictures of bikes here that the Bike Santa Cruz County and the Bicycle Advisory Committee to the RTC also have been supporting the Rail and Trail project for these reasons, because it's good for cyclists. Anyway, we talked about the disabled. Basically, studies have been done that if we add clean light rail to our system in Santa Cruz, it will lead to a 150% increase in people using public transit countywide. And that means more riders on Metro as well. It'll increase Metro ridership. And if you think about like that graphic I showed earlier with the bus routes kind of connecting to the transit stop, that's called pulse scheduling. If any of you have ever, say, taken the 17 bus over to Diridon Station and then caught, say, the Capitol Corridor bus, they're timed to work together. And when you come back, you just step off the train and the bus is waiting for you and off you go. And it's a very smooth connection. When you make really smooth connections like that, you increase transit ridership. And because of this great increase in transit ridership, we're going to have more people out of their cars. One of the reasons people are going to want to ride the transit is the travel times. Check out these projected travel times. Watsonville to Santa Cruz in 40 minutes. You can't beat that with a stick. It's hard to drive it that fast, even when there isn't traffic. And so people are going to choose transit because it's comfortable, it's reliable. Unlike a bus, it's not stuck in the same traffic as all the cars. I took the bus to Watsonville for years when I worked there, and it's you're just sitting in the same traffic as everybody else. You're just not in your own personal car is the only difference, and it's a little slower. But this will be faster, and that's one of the reasons it's going to attract that increased ridership. And increased ridership means more people out of their cars. More people out of their cars means reduced carbon emissions. And the RTC did some studies about exactly how much carbon would be saved if we added clean light rail to our system. And it's equivalent to planting 61,000 trees every year that the system is in operation. So 61,000 trees year after year after year. That's a significant reduction in carbon. And this is why the environmental groups are supporting the Rail and Trail Project and opposing the Greenway Initiative. It's the Sierra Club, Santa Cruz Climate Action Network, Youth for Climate Justice. They're all supporting the Rail and Trail Project because it's good for the climate. The other thing to remember is we're part of something much bigger here. If you look at the graphic on the left, that's the regional transit plan, and you can see that Monterey plans to build their train out to meet us at Pajaro Junction in Watsonville. And the train from Gilroy will come into Pajaro Junction. Watsonville is going to become a transit hub, and it'll be really great for the economic development of Watsonville, which is why the Watsonville City Council a year or two ago unanimously voted to support the idea of the Rail and Trail Project. They know how good it's going to be for their economy and for the people who live in Watsonville who are trying to get to work. On the right, you can see the state rail plan. And there again, our little branch line is a part of that. And again, you've got to imagine, think of all the people who come to Santa Cruz for tourism from, Castroville and Gilroy and Salinas. If they could come without their cars, and light rail would deliver them direct to key tourist destinations that are actually very hard to find parking in, like Aptos Village, Capitola Village, the Boardwalk. The rail runs right through that. And so this is why a lot of small businesses are really excited about it, because it'll deliver tourists without the traffic. Now, I mentioned the state rail plan, which the graphic on the right is about. We pay our taxes into the state rail plan right now. And our population weighted share, the amount that Santa Cruz County is expected to pay into the state rail plan in taxes, is about $1 billion. Now, we can let all these other communities who are planning their rail systems use our tax dollars, or we can bring some of that money home again and use it in our county for our project. So this is a very popular vision. There was some polling done last year, and it was done by FM3, very reputable polling company that is often used by like school boards in Santa Cruz when they're going out for like a bond or whatever, and they want to see what the likelihood of actually getting that passed is. Anyway, FM3 did this polling, and they found that there's very strong support for Rail and Trail Project together. Build the trail, save the tracks for transit. 74%. That's a really high level of support. And they found it's popular in all the districts. I mean, it varies a little, as you can see, from district to district, but it's strong across the county. They also looked at all the demographics. And if you look at the bottom of these bars, regardless of age, gender, political party, race, economic status, how close you live to the tracks. It doesn't matter. It's popular. Everybody likes it. Well, not everybody. I mean, obviously there's a minority of people, above the blue bars here that are either undecided or opposed, but it's very popular. There's very few projects that are this popular. And that's why so many local businesses and so many organizations are supportive of the project, of the idea of rail and trail together. And of course, we would love to get your support, either as an organization endorsing the vision of the Coast Connect vision of all that connected transit and safe passage for people who are not in cars, or as individuals. And there's places here you can see that you can go online and you can endorse the vision and you can subscribe to get updates and all of that. I used to end my presentations here, but unfortunately, even popular projects do have opponents, and they are not necessarily safe from opposition. And that's where the Greenway Initiative comes in. So, the Greenway people saw the same polling results we did last year. And so they have kind of changed their messaging. They used to talk about how, bad trains were and how nobody likes transit. And when they found out that actually people love transit, they started changing how they talked about it. And when they circulated their initiative, they didn't say, shall we tear up the tracks? You want to sign that petition? No, they said, would you like to build a trail? People were like, yeah, you betcha, I want a trail. And they signed the petition and now it's on the ballot. But what's actually in the measure is 9 pages of legal language that mostly is about strike throughs in our general plan, removing all reference to light rail from our general plan. And then saying that this idea of a greenway should be built on where the tracks are, which that means tearing up our tracks. Okay, so that's basically what the measure is in front of us. Should we tear up the tracks? That's the question, and stop planning for transit. And the other thing is, when you amend the general plan this way through an initiative, the only way you can undo that is through another vote later. So usually general plans are, there's a lot of community input and a lot of planners get involved. And then, those can be amended later if we learn new things and things need to change. But if it's done this way, through a vote, the only way you can undo it is through another election. So just even if you hate transit, you got to be willing to make, you got to believe that that is also a good way to make public policy. So what would be the effects of Measure D? All right. The trail, as I said, is under construction, but what's going to happen is all that planning will have to stop. There's going to be a bunch of legal battles, and there's going to have to be new planning. Remember I said about how so much of the work happens behind the scenes before the shovel ever hits the ground? Well, all that has to start over. Okay, so there's going to be years of delay on the trail if this passes. Well, it's going to remove the tracks, so that's not good if you want transit. It removes all references to rail planning from our general plan, and it calls for track removal. The other thing you have to think about is, look at what track removal looks like, and look at all that gravel. It's not just the rails and the ties. It's this ballast that's been in the ground for 150 years. God knows what's dripped into that. It's going to be an environmental hazard. And the mitigations are going to be steep. Where are they going to dispose of all that? It's going to be very expensive to remove, and it's going to be a real environmental trauma to remove all that. And then a trail-only project is not for everyone. It doesn't. If you work in Santa Cruz, really, are you going to walk or bike 20 miles to work, do your job, and then do that home again, another 20 miles? Unless you are very, very fit and have a lot of time. No, not everybody can go 20 miles on a trail to get to where they need to go. And so there's a lot of, basically, the working class and the disabled and the elderly, people who can't drive or can't afford a car, are really targeted by this measure. It says no transit for you. And then, of course, all those climate benefits of clean light rail, we don't get them. We're lucky enough to have clean green energy locally because of our Monterey Bay electricity plan. And so if we do an electric rail, it's going to be carbon free. But and not to mention that steel wheels on rails take much less energy to push. And so there's just like the physics about it. It takes a lot more energy to move rubber tires on the road than it does steel wheels on rails. And so even if it's an electric bus, it takes a lot more electricity to move a bus than it does a train. And additionally, there's all the pollution from the tires. I've learned from, doing this work that a lot of, they talk about all that the microplastics in the ocean. Well, they've done some studies here in the Bay Area, scooping that up and saying, well, where did all this come from? It's tire wear. A lot of it is wear from our tires. And, I had never really thought about that before. I know my tires wear out. It never occurred to me to think, where does all that go? It becomes microplastics in our ocean. Now, the major D people will talk a lot about rail banking. And, it sounds like a bank for tracks. Banks are where you save things. So it sounds like a way to save things. But actually, it's kind of a deceptive name. It's a federal legal maneuver that allows for track removal. Okay. And rail tracks around the country have been banked, and then those tracks have been torn up. And in nowhere where the tracks have been torn up and a paved path put in their place, like what Greenway's proposing here, has that been torn up again and then the rail restored to service. There have been a few places where the tracks weren't torn up, and then later they decided to start service again. There have been some places where maybe there was some gravel put down, not kind of a crummy trail that they could take up easily. But in terms of track removal and pavement, never has that been reversed. So if we do, and that's what Greenway's proposing. So if we do this rail banking, we're not getting transit. It's not going to happen. And let's look at the plan right now. This is the plan. We've got tracks, and you can see there's a rail bed underneath. And this is the plan, is to add a trail next to it. Okay. That's the current plan. That's been the plan that's been approved and been in the works for many years. This is the Greenway plan. They say that it's an interim trail. So that means that you take the tracks up, then you put a trail down, then later you pull up that interim trail, you put the trail where it should have been in the first place, and then you restore the tracks. That's what they say they're doing. Oh, rail banking, we'll bring back the tracks later when we need them. Well, first of all, we need them now because of that traffic jam on Highway 1. But also, it just doesn't make any sense as a project. And it'll be way more expensive than just building it right the first time. A lot of people have been asking lately about what's up with Roaring Camp. How did that get involved in this? And so we sort of had to add a little discussion about that. Okay, if you look at this slide, the blue line is the state rail network. Okay, that's the existing rail line. The yellow line is our Santa Cruz branch rail line. It's called a branch because it ends in Davenport. It doesn't connect to anything after that. And that's the one that is being fixed up now, and the trail is being built next to it. Then if you look at the red arrow, that's where Roaring Camp is. And the smaller black line is the Roaring Camp line. So that line is owned by Roaring Camp, and we, the citizens, own the yellow line through the RTC. Now, all these lines, it kind of doesn't matter who owns the line. It's all in the federal rail network, and it's under the jurisdiction of the Surface Transportation Board. And when you think back to, again, building out rail in the 19th century, what was that about? They didn't want to have a situation where every little locality had control of the rail line, because, I don't know, you're sending tracks of, the Transcontinental Railroad going across the country, and Ogden, Utah decides, well, we'll just take 3 feet of track out of our town here. Well, suddenly the whole Transcontinental Railroad doesn't work, right? Because you just move a little bit and the whole thing's broken. And so it's all under federal jurisdiction, and you can't remove track without federal permission. And so, and it's called abandonment. And so to rail bank, first you file for abandonment, and then you ask for permission to bank the tracks. And that means then you can get permission to tear them up. So if, again, to avoid that imaginary problem, I said, like, what if Ogden just wants to take out 3 feet of track and the whole transcontinental system falls apart? Well, similarly, if let's say Ogden said, I want to tear up my tracks, anybody who's using them could object and say, no, we're using that. And in our case, anybody who's a freight customer can object, or Roaring Camp can object. Because think about, how are they getting trains up to Roaring Camp? Well, they come down that blue line, they get on the yellow line, and then they go up the little black line to where the red arrow is. That's how Roaring Camp gets their equipment. And Roaring Camp, not many of us know this, but they're a freight operator too. And they're actually kind of managing the freight operations out of Watsonville. And when the tracks get fixed the rest of the way, if there are freight customers, say in Santa Cruz, like maybe those building supply companies or Big Creek Lumber has expressed an interest in running their lumber out on freight, Roaring Camp wants to manage that. So when people talk about, well, we'd like to rail bank the yellow line here, Roaring Camp objects and probably are not going to get permission from the federal government to tear up the yellow tracks because Roaring Camp needs them. So some people over at the RTC who are on the Greenway side of things said, well, what we need to do is we need to take out Roaring Camp then. So what we'll do is we'll file for what's called third-party adverse abandonment on that little black line. We don't own the line, but we're going to ask the federal government to abandon that line. Then Roaring Camp's out of business, then they can't object to tearing up the yellow tracks. And so they're sort of like the collateral damage. The people who are opposed to transit, just like, well, you know, if we have to take out this family-owned, woman-owned business in at Roaring Camp to get our way to destroy the tracks, well, oh well, that's kind of, they're just sort of the I don't think they have it in for Roaring Camp per se. It's just they don't care if their business is damaged or destroyed as a result of this. So when that was proposed, there was such a hue and cry, such an outcry. There were over 6,000 emails submitted to the RTC saying, don't abandon the Felton line and don't abandon the Santa Cruz line. And there were like 2 letters in favor of adverse abandonment of the Felton line. Now, what's interesting is kind of how this stuff gets reported in the press. Oh, there were over 6,000 emails to the RTC. It's very controversial. It's like, well, there were over 6,000 emails to the RTC, but if all except 2 of them are saying the same thing, don't abandon the line, that's not controversial. That's a consensus. And so, you know, there is a minority opposed to the Rail and Trail project, but there's becoming this false equivalency sometimes in the press where it'll be like, it's sort of like, you know, you've seen some of those climate change reports that sound like this. Most people think 2 + 2 is 4, but others disagree. Let's talk to a different opinion, you know, and it's like, well, yeah, there are people with other opinions, but they're not the majority. And you can see here the endorsements of the No Way Greenway campaign. Look at all those organizations. It's these Democratic clubs, it's these environmental groups, it's the community organizations, it's the Korea College Federation of Teachers, huge variety of people. Chambers of Commerce and the Sierra Club are all agreeing that this is a bad idea. They this particular list doesn't show you the electeds, but if you go on the website, there's this huge number of elected officials who also oppose the Greenway Initiative. Many of them are candidates for the same office right now, running against each other, but they agree on this. Others of them have been in pitched political battles about other issues, but they agree on this. You know, that 74% approval of the idea of rail and trail means that it cuts across all these different traditional political fissures in our community. And so people who disagreed about rent control or the recall in the city of Santa Cruz agree about this. People who, you know, voted for different people for their supervisor in the last election agree about this. And it's a wonderful opportunity for us to like kind of experience working together with people who we are traditionally opponents of. It's also kind of a challenge, you know, because sometimes people see the name of somebody they oppose or an organization they don't like, and they're like, ah, well, this place isn't for me. But look more closely and, you know, you'll find people that you do agree with. It's an interesting coalition that we're building here to try to stop tearing out the tracks in our community and stopping all rail planning. So again, there's ways you can get involved. You can follow No Way Greenway on social media. You can endorse the campaign and, you know, volunteer. You know, every campaign needs people to go door to door and drop literature and things like that. You can invite us to speak. We are speaking at all kinds of clubs, civic clubs, you know, the Lions and the Rotaries and all that, and political groups like this and the Democratic clubs, PTAs, the Garden Club, will go anywhere. And if you don't like my presentation, we've got other people who can go instead. We got a lot of people who are happy to go speak and share the information, because it's really important that we just do this, conversations about what's going on with this. And I don't know if Indivisible is thinking about taking a stand as an organization, but we would be honored to have Indivisible's endorsement. And certainly, if not as a group, all the people who are individuals who would like to preserve the transit future for our community. And that is that. I'm going to stop sharing, and we can go to questions and answers. And while we're getting that lined up, I'm going to put some links in the chat that you can use. Some of these are for general information. Some of them are articles about questions that I often get asked during the Q&A, and people can read about them. There's also some links to other presentations. There's, why is that not working? Anyway, there's a longer presentation that includes an interview with Rosemary Sarka from Roaring Camp that you can see if you want. There's also a link to a nice short video about the construction of the trail. And like I said, lots of other information that you can use. I see I have to put it in.
Thank you so much, Sally. This was great information. I'm Maria Mead. I did want to, before we go to the question and answers, I'm going to be hosting or helping with the question and answers, but we did also invite Pauline Seals to speak, and I just wanted to introduce her. I think we can all agree this has become I know that the majority of people do want the tracks, but it has, as we know, become somewhat of a hot button issue in our relatively small county. And one of the reasons that we're doing this event is so people can learn more. And we invited Pauline Seals to speak as well, because she is respected as somebody who's an expert on climate action in this community. She's a retired science teacher, an active grandmother, a cyclist, and a docent. She's working mostly with Santa Cruz Climate Action Network and Youth for Climate Justice. And she's just going to speak a little bit for a few minutes to tell people why she is in support of the rail and trail solution. Thank you, Pauline.
Thank you, Mimi. Maria, can you hear me correct? Can you hear me okay? Okay, so Sally gave such a great presentation. She touched a lot on the environmental issues. So there's really not a whole lot I need to say, and we're a little bit over time, so I'll be brief. The urgency of the climate situation is just horrific. If we can't get a handle on this very, very soon, it's going to be really bad for my grandchildren and other people in those age groups. And we have to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions. And for this county, Highway 1 is just a disaster, because all those cars, especially because the normal driving, they would produce a lot of greenhouse gases and particles. But since they spend part of their time not moving very fast, it's even worse. And it's very difficult to come up with solutions for this. There have been various things proposed, like rapid bus on the shoulder of the freeway that have not been able to move ahead. Fast lanes on Soquel, and that's not been able to go ahead. Finally, the rail seems feasible. Between the demonstration of the Coast Futura light rail car on portions of the track last year, showing that it doesn't need a whole new set of tracks, it just needs minor maintenance. The fact that the detailed plans have been worked out for several areas that look tricky. The San Lorenzo Bridge looked a real problem. And if you've ever done it with a bike in the past, it was nasty. It was about this wide. Well, it wasn't very wide. So when you came along wheeling your bike, because you wouldn't have dared ride along there, you actually had to kind of move the handlebars sideways when you met somebody else with a bike, or you couldn't pass. And it's like, well, what are they going to do? they built this excellent trail along the side of the bridge. And there are different engineering solutions for the different areas, but there are solutions for all of them. Barry Scott has assured me, and I trust Barry. It's really, really important that we work on reducing the greenhouse gas emissions, and it's a social justice thing. The Greenway people think that the workers from Watsonville and maybe Salinas who work in our hospitals, restaurants, etc., they're not going to do the whole thing on electric bikes. They don't have $3,000 for an electric bike each. They're not in a situation to take out loans. They're going to keep riding several people to a vehicle. Well, that's good, but they're going to keep riding in their old gasoline vehicles until something is done. And this is one step. We need to have this in motion. Finally, with the infrastructure bill, it's possible that it can get funded so long as the county stays on top of it. And that's why defeating this measure is so important. The county people have to have all their facts worked out and be ready to apply for grants. The federal government, as well as the state, are looking for things like this. Some places don't have tracks. They don't necessarily even have a route, but they'd like to set something up. We have the Don track. It's only in need of maintenance, and this is a perfect project. So hopefully funds will be found. As Sally pointed out, we pay $1 billion into the state, and we should be able to get the funds, but only if we defeat Measure M and the county engineers stay on top of this and write up the right things. So please vote no on D. Thank you.
Thanks, Pauline. I just want to point out it was Measure D. I think you said Measure M.
Sorry.
No,
I think I said that at the beginning. I had it right at the end. I had kind of a nasty thing going up there. Oh, M, never mind.
Well, thank you so much, Pauline. Thank you so much, both of you, Sally. I'm going to go ahead and start asking these questions. As you can imagine, there are lots of questions, and I know that you are the person to answer them, Sally, but I really appreciate all the information that you've given us. So I'm going to start. There are a lot of different sort of topics. So one that I thought I'd start with are what are the economics for funding the rail, and do we have the population to sustain it?
Yes. Yeah. I've learned a lot about how transit projects are funded. And because we passed the old Measure D in 2016, it's unfortunately very confusing because now we have another transit related Measure D, but it's that tax money that we're paying becomes what's called the local match and is used for the all that behind the scenes work I talked about, the design, the engineering, the environmental review, all that stuff happens using our local money, and then we go out for a grant from the states or feds. Like I said, the segment going up to past Wilder Ranch and up to Davenport, that one is going to be funded by Federal Lands Access Program. The part of the trail that's going around the sewage treatment plant on the west side is going to be funded by a statewide active transportation grant. There's like all these different pots of money that can be used, but you have to show like the locals have some skin in the game first. And then the ratio really varies. The standard one is considered 1 to 5. We put in 20% and we put in one amount and like $1 million, and we get 5 million from the state or the feds. Generally, it's sometimes not that good. Sometimes it's better. It sort of depends. And part of our grant application might be, we'll put in 2 million to get your 5 million, and then you get more competitive to get the money. But Monterey is, again, they're building their rail line out to us. They tore up some of their tracks and they're regretting it now, and they're having to rebuild, and they're rebuilding back to to meet us in Watsonville. And they have they for one of their stations, I forget what it was, like they put up like 7% and got the rest funded from out of county money. And so it varies, you can't say it's always going to be a certain way, but that's basically how it works. And as Pauline mentioned, our a lot of the times the Greenway people will say it's $1 billion boondoggle, which is delightfully alliterative, but it is perhaps not super accurate. Those are some numbers that were kind of a rough estimate of what it would cost to build it and run it and maintain it for 30 years. And if our share of the state rail plan is $1 billion, well, there you go. It's like, and a lot of people think those are very high estimates anyway. Because, a lot of the earlier rail studies were done when you had to have wayside power, like overhead wires or a third rail. But now, like the Coast Futura demonstration, which some of you may have enjoyed, they have onboard power, and that saves about $5 million a mile in construction. And so, and it's much cleaner, it's much lighter, it's much quieter. And so, and it's cheaper, way cheaper. So the funding numbers are a little mobile, but I think the thing we have to think about with funding overall is transportation infrastructure is expensive, really expensive. Widening the highway is really expensive. Building a new on-ramp or off-ramp, really expensive. Just striping a bike lane down a road is expensive. The question is not, will it be expensive? Yes, it will be. The question is this your values? Is this what you want to see? Do you want to see more people in private vehicles, or do you want to see a transit option? That's really, it's a values question.
Thank you. About 3 people brought up sort of what do you think are the motivations of Greenway, and why are they so hell-bent on not having the rail, and how are they financed?
That's a lot of questions.
And we can break that up if
sure. Okay. I have to say, I feel a little uncomfortable characterizing other people who should probably speak for themselves. And I will also say that there's what people say, and then there's what's in people's heart, and you can't look into somebody else's heart. And so everything I'm going to say is going to be a little bit with that caveat. Okay. But I will say that I don't believe, and then I guess the other thing I want to say before I even start is, if you think about Greenway as sort of a pyramid of people, and at the top there are like the big funders and the founders and the people who are really committed, and they know what they're doing and they know why they're doing it, and they, I believe, are feeding a lot of disinformation to the community. And then as you go down the pyramid, you have like the average person who might think they oppose this rail and trail project, but then when you ask them why, it's for reasons that are not accurate. Like they say, I don't want to see a diesel locomotive in my neighborhood. Well, good, because nobody's planning to give you a diesel locomotive. Or they'll say, oh, the fences will stop our access. And it's like, well, if you look at the West Side Trail, the trail project is increased access. There's no fence crossing a street or a sidewalk that keeps you from getting anywhere. So like, people have a reason, but it's not based in truth. It's not accurate. So like, if, usually what I say is, what, if that were true, I would agree with you, but it's not true. And so, again, if the pyramid, that bulk of people who think they're opposed to this project, when I talk to them, a lot of times it's just for things that are not accurate. At the top, the funders, there's like 5 very, very wealthy people in the community who are the big backers of the Greenway. And I think they have different reasons. And again, you'd have to talk to them to, but one of them is a big landowner in South County. And if you tear up the tracks, he could maybe get access to his land again if it's an easement, or might have to repurchase that easement. So there might be a financial reason there. One of them is invested in what he calls personal mobility devices, like electric skateboards and scooters and bikes and stuff. And wants to see a dedicated path for electric personal mobility devices that he would like to sell to people. And there are some people who are generally just opposed to public spending, people who don't like the idea of, there are people who just don't like public spending. They only if it encourages private ownership, like private ownership of an electric vehicle, private ownership of an electric bike, but not something that's publicly owned like a bus or a train. And so I think that not everybody has the same reason for being opposed to this project. But I think a lot of it comes down to values and what you want to see for our community.
Thank you. A few people commented that they see a lot of yes on Measure D and flyers saying, pro Greenway. Are we going to start seeing more no on Measure D and more signs and more mailings coming out on from the other side?
Yeah. Well, our side doesn't have that kind of money. But there are signs coming. There are big 4x4 road signs coming. There are places where it's legal to post signs and places where it is not. And some campaigns don't really worry about getting permission from landowners, and they just put it up and hope. Or we're not doing it that way. We're asking permission. So if somebody has an idea of of a location where we have permission from a landowner to post a big 4x4 road sign that has good visibility, we would love to hear about that. And you can send it to info@No Way Greenway, and we would because we're collecting those locations because we want to have permission. We're not, I know the Greenway people have put some of their signs up in the rail right of way. That's illegal. Or on Caltrans land, by highways, that's illegal. We're not going that way. So you're not going to see ours in some of those places, but signs are being delivered this week and we're eager to put them up. And in terms of flyers, we really hope to raise enough money to do a mailing, and anybody's welcome to donate to help us with that. Right now, we're doing it with volunteer labor. We've got our flyers, and we're sending them, we're delivering them by hand to people's doors. And if anybody would like to help with that, you can go on the No Way Greenway website and sign up to volunteer. And I'm doing a lot of volunteer organizing. You'll probably hear from me and we'll send you out with a stack of these and you can start putting them on people's doors. So yeah, that's happening, but we're just not as fully funded. It's hard to beat 5 multimillionaires.
Here's a question. If Measure D is defeated, will the rail trail continue as previously planned?
Yeah, that's basically what will happen. It'll just continue. I think the other thing that's important about this is there's a bunch of legal entanglements about if Measure D, in the language of Measure D, and you are welcome to read the whole thing. I encourage it. But the other thing that's happening here, besides the legal language in the measure, is it's a political move here. What we're doing is we're showing our electeds what we want. And if we can have an overwhelming defeat of this plan to tear up the tracks, it will stiffen the spines of some of our more timid electeds who have been intimidated by some threat to their political future if they were to support rail and trail.
Thank you. Somebody asked, first of all, what's the likelihood of getting the funding to have the rail actually be built? And what about this need to have a train toot at every crossing?
The likelihood of funding is really good. When they were preparing the business plan, they had already identified about 50% of the funding. That's really unusual this early in a project. I mean, they're talking about widening the highway south of State Park Drive to Freedom. They haven't identified any funding for that yet. I mean, they're proceeding with the plan, but they've got no funding plan for it. And I mean, they may find funding, though I have to say Caltrans is really shifting their funding priorities from highways to transit and trains, which hence the state rail plan we looked at earlier. But it, like I talked about that thing where, you do all the environmental review and the design and the engineering, and then you go out and look for a grant. And to have 50, idea that where you can get 50% of that funding already, that's a lot this early. So the prospects for funding are good if we apply. You got to apply for it. The tooting. Okay, there's something called quiet crossings that can be done. And there's certain safety measures you can put in. And if you think about like the VTA up in San Jose, it's not like a big noisy, they can make those, just go ding, 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 ding as they cross. And because it can just be like a stoplight and just be, ding, 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 and it passes and then off you go. And if you think about it, I know some people are like, it's going to hold up traffic. I'll just anticipate that question because it often comes up. If you think about it, 50 people on one vehicle that passes every 20 minutes, or 50 people in a line of cars, 50 cars, which is going to hold up traffic longer.
Thank you. This is a two-part question. One you've answered, but I think it's bears repeating, is how many rail bank miles of railroad have been brought back? And I know you said that, and then maybe you can just repeat the answer to that.
That have been paved over, like is proposed here, 0. Now, there have been some other places where it was rail bank, not used for a while, but the tracks weren't torn up. And I don't know the exact number of miles. It's not a lot. It's not impossible, but there's not a lot. And when it's been torn out and paved, as that little video I showed you, that little animation, it's like, it doesn't have to be a rocket scientist to think about how expensively wasteful that is. So it doesn't happen.
Thank you. And then what I'm looking at keeps moving. Yeah. So I just wanted to go back to that one person's question. It's funny. Things got kind of reorganized. Let's see, where did that go? I just wanted to honor that one person's question because I was just about to read it, and maybe it got maybe because we answered it. Okay, I'm going to go. I'm going to go back to a new question. A bike path and equitable public transit seems awesome. Is there a way with the planning to have fewer fences, which might be perceived as preventing access to the corridor from each neighborhood, and make more people happy and still maintain safety? This seems to be a point of contention that we might improve on.
Yeah. So again, I guess I would really encourage people who are wondering, like, how is this going to work, to come to the west side and walk the trail. You can start at Bay in California. You can walk out to the edge of town and back, or ride your bike or a scooter or wheelchair, or whatever you want to do. It's all accessible. I saw a guy in an electric wheelchair followed by 3 unicycles the other day. So you can take your choice. And you'll see how it works. It doesn't impede access at all, because obviously when there's a sidewalk or a road, there's no fence. And so there's no, it actually increases access, because now there is this straight line through the neighborhood. Like if my arm is the trail, and there's all these kind of crazy streets on the west side that had this weird ways you had to get around, and now there's just a straight shot on the trail. So it really increases access. And I can get why people might think it's going to be a problem, but I would just urge you to come take a walk, and you'll see it's not a problem.
Great. Somebody else says, why don't we just use buses instead of needing the rail? Buses can be more flexible to change routes as population and commerce changes.
Buses are great. And this is not a buses versus train question. This is a buses and train issue. Metro really wanted to explore the idea of, well, what if we paved over the tracks and ran buses there? And they looked into it in the Transit Corridors Alternatives Analysis Study, the TCAA, which you can find on the RTC's website. And Metro just gave up. They said it's way too expensive, so expensive. Again, tearing out the tracks and paving, super expensive. And then and it's just so much cheaper to use what's there and run a train on it. And absolutely, buses can reconfigure their routes, which is one of the beauties of buses, but it's sort of like that, it's that push-pull. You got the beauty of you can go anywhere on the streets, but you're on the streets with the traffic with everybody else. And the train isn't. The train is time certain regardless of traffic. And so it increases, it shortens transit time so much that more people are willing to actually then get on a bus to like do their last mile, say up to the university or something. So they studied the bus thing, and even Metro said like, okay, we wanted you to look at it, but never mind.
Great. Somebody else says, we keep hearing that other rail systems like in Sonoma aren't successful. Is that true? Would that be comparable to our transit plans?
You know, I hear this and I don't know what they mean by that. I don't know what the definition of not successful is. You know, when they when they built the Sonoma smart train, they found that immediately they had to add cars to take so many people with their bikes who were using the transit, and so they had to add cars. Then the fires happened and people used it to evacuate. Highway 101 was a parking lot. People needed to get out of Santa Rosa. They brought their luggage on the train and got out. It saved people's lives. There were, I went up there because, you know, I'm a transit nerd. So I went up to Sonoma on a little weekend trip, and we stayed in a little hotel near the train station, and we took the train one day and talked to people on the train and came back, and we did things along the way, and it was lots of fun. I met a woman who was picking up her grandchildren from school, and she said, I couldn't do this if there weren't the train. If I had to drive there, I couldn't do it. So she gets to see her grandkids every day. Her daughter gets free childcare. The kids get to spend time with family. It would not happen without a train. I met another woman who was going to work, and she's like, I can go to work further away now. I would never do this in my car. I'd just be stuck in my car forever, but I can get a better paying job now. And so I mean, sometimes they say it's not making money. It's transit. It's not supposed to make money. It's like saying the highway's not making money, or the parks aren't making money, or the schools aren't making money. That's not what they're meant to do. They're public services. So maybe when they say it's a failure, maybe that's what they mean. I don't really know.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Can a trail be built at all if the tracks are removed? Won't it become a legal hotbed for adjacent property owners to seize the easements?
That is a problem. That is a potential problem. But if they rail, this is why people want to rail bank, is then you can, there will be a legal hotbed, but when people sue, they sue the federal government, not the local agencies. So if you tear up the tracks, yes, you're inviting lawsuits. But the reason rail banking sort of solves a problem that rail banking creates. If you rail bank and tear up the tracks, yes, legal hotbed, lots of lawsuits, taxpayer money going out in buckets. But if you rail bank, all that's directed at the federal government instead of the local government. So that's why the people who want to tear out the tracks also want a rail bank, because it will redirect that legal mess to the feds. It's still our tax money, but you know, it won't be a local county legal fight.
Great. Somebody else says, can tracks legally be used for the rail project?
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, again, I will point you to the demonstration that happened last fall, and we put this small self-propelled light rail on those tracks, and we went back and forth hourly between Watsonville and Santa Cruz, and we did it hourly in Watsonville into the sloughs. It was beautiful. You saw eagles and all kinds of cool things in the sloughs, and yeah, absolutely can be done.
Great. How is it physically possible to keep the rail and add a trail in areas where the current rail seems pretty narrow? For example, in Aptos from Seacliff to Seascape.
There are places where it looks really narrow because of encroachment. And some of that encroachment is just vegetation that's just grown up, you know, and so it looks narrow, but you know, if you cut back the vegetation, you've got space. Some places there will need to be retaining walls because there's like a hillside coming down to the tracks, and you need to like take that back a bit and put a retaining wall in so there's room. There are places where some people who live adjacent to the tracks have built into the right of way, and maybe unknowingly or maybe knowingly, I don't know, but it's sort of like if we're next door neighbors and I put my barbecue on your side of the fence, at some point you're going to tell me to take it out. So there's places that look really narrow, and some places are more narrow than others, but there are solutions.
Great. Trying to sort of put things together a little bit.
Yeah.
Somebody says, excellent presentation. I was so confused and this has already helped immensely. I definitely will vote no on D. I don't have a question, but would like to suggest changing the No Way Greenway slogan. It sounds like you are against any green initiatives. A clear no on D, or D is for derail, or something along those lines might make it more clear that Measure D will eliminate possibilities for light rail.
Yeah, I know the whole messaging thing has been really a conundrum for us. First of all, it did not, they started in August and they were calling it Greenway. So that's what we had to work with. I mean, it's a greenwashing kind of thing, it's like how Clorox will color their bleach bottle green, and then suddenly it's supposed to be like good for the environment. And so we're kind of stuck with that. And I mean, it's very clever. You got to give them points for clever. The other clever thing they've done is their signs are using the same colors, the same slogan, and the same font as 2016's Measure D, to try to like.
I find that very confusing myself.
It's you got to give them points for clever.
Yeah.
And so we're kind of stuck with that. Now that it's got a letter, which it only just got a few weeks ago, we're are shifting more to the no on D language. But they chose to use that brand, and we kind of got to use it. I like D for derail though. That's pretty cool.
I do too.
There's so many wonderful opportunities here.
Somebody else says, and I don't understand one of the acronyms, and I feel stupid, so maybe somebody can tell me what it means, but it says, how can we get more traction on people understanding the delay that this represents? I hear the FMLM.
First mile, last mile.
Oh, first mile, last mile bike or other metro. I worked in Watsonville, live in Seabright, and would have taken the train every day last week to work. I had a conversation with our ocean backyard Gary Griggs this week. Why do we call it a tourist train? That's not right.
Yeah. Well, it's tourist train is apparently it's like the name calling that the Greenway people like to use. I guess because they're kind of equivocate, trying to make it equivalent to say Roaring Camp, which I guess you could call that a tourist train. It's not so much a transit system. But we're talking about a transit system. Now, will tourists ride it? Yeah, tourists are going to ride it. But good, the more tourists we get to drop their money in our town without bringing their cars, like the better, I say. I mean, it's good for business, it's good for our economy, and it's, helps the rest of us move around the county more easily. But so I don't know, it's really unfortunate. I saw an email exchange with Gary Griggs and somebody else where, I mean, Gary does a wonderful column and he's done nice things for our community. He's just misinformed on this. I mean, he thought that the gauge was different from a standard gauge. It's not, I mean, that's the thing, is like a lot of wonderful people think they're opposed to this project, but then when you dig deep, it's just based on, unfortunately, misinformation.
Somebody else says, and I think this is really interesting, and I kind of heard about this when I heard another talk with the person from Roaring Camp, but somebody else says, wildland fires are incredibly polluting. Do you know that every trail only scheme would prevent firefighters from accessing the redwood forest of Henry Cowell Redwood State Park and the Pogonip open space by rail and railroad access road? The 5 fire chiefs of our CZU firefighters made a joint public statement against, and within 1 week was supported by over 6,000 messages from the public. Have you forgotten the help everyone needed during the fires already?
No, I have not forgotten. And I mean, we talked about, the evacuation of Santa Rosa by train. And, in doing this work, I've learned a lot of interesting things. Roaring Camp doesn't brag about this a lot because it's sort of off brand for them. It's all about like happy people on the antique train, but they do rescues when people do stupid stuff down in the San Lorenzo River, and they break something and then they need to get out of there, they bring people out by train, and they they do tons. They bring like a big empty empty rail car down and clear up debris off that whole track area that's been left there by the homeless, and they keep it clean. But talking about garbage and people with broken necks is not on brand for them, so they do not brag about this. But they do a lot of that work, and again, if this idea to try to make Roaring Camp tear up their tracks, so that they can, basically put Roaring Camp out of business so they can't object to tearing out the Santa Cruz branch line. As that writer wrote, there's a lot of advantages to having that other access deep into the mountains.
And here's another one. What about the economics for funding the rail? And do we have the population to sustain it?
Well, we already talked about the economics, I think, but population wise, that's an interesting question. And it comes down to, I mentioned density earlier. And the reason I did that is because sustaining transit is less about the number of people than how dense they are. And so, for example, Fresno has more people than Santa Cruz County, but it's so sprawling and spread out. It's very hard for them to make a transit system work. We're less people, but very compact and dense. Again, we've got densities similar to Portland and Oakland. So we have, as Pauline mentioned, we already own the darn right of way. We already have tracks. We're practically there. All we have to do is fix it up and stick a train on it. We're so close. Whereas other communities are having to buy right of way and build from scratch. And it's not about the raw numbers of people, but how dense they are. And we've got the density.
Fantastic. Somebody else says, if the rail and trail have been planned for years, why hasn't it been initiated? In the year 2045, I will be 93 and I would love to ride the train while I can still walk.
Yeah, me too. Me too. So partly it's because these things take time. There's a lot of pieces to this, like I've been talking about. And, it's just kind of amazing to me how long things take to get done. Years and years and years of planning. And partly it's because we have like strong environmental protections here, which delay things, but that's good that we want to protect our environment, but that's a piece of it. But it's also because the opponents have put up opposition. This is the thing that cracks me up. It's like they're at every time there's a meeting to implement some piece of trail, and there has to be like something done at a planning meeting or a city council meeting, they're objecting. No, don't do it, don't build this trail. The only trail that would be good is if it's built on the tracks, stop it. And then they go out in public and they say, we want a trail now. It's like, well, that's not what you said at the meeting I was at last night, and then the other thing is they keep insisting on, we need more studies. We need to study what it would be like to do the trail only. And so then the studies are done. They show that that's not feasible and not good for the environment and not going to move the most people. And they don't like that study, so they demand another study. And then they say, all this money is being wasted on studies and all these delays of studies. And it's like, yeah, that's because you were insisting on that, and political deals get brokered. So that's also part of the reason.
Here's another one. I have followed the rail from the boardwalk to Watsonville. It is one of the most scenic rails anywhere in the world, with plenty of ocean views and natural beauty. Why not focus on the potential that we are sitting on instead of Greenway?
Yes.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Let's see. What about the areas where the trail will have to go off the tracks? Too narrow for required 25-foot setback from speeding train. Our central area is only 27 feet wide. Aptos, Capitola, Harkin Slough.
There's room for the trail and the rail just about everywhere. The Harkin Slough thing is a little different, or there's areas in the South County, and this is, again, we're kind of going off into the weeds here. Okay, there's a thing about farms. When people are walking, like if you're a farmer and you see like strange footprints in your farm, you have to destroy that crop. And if there's a trail right through farmland, farmers are concerned that people are going to get off the trail and go pick some strawberries. And I think they're less concerned about the loss of a few strawberries than they are about having to destroy crops because this rule about strange footprints in your, anyway, they don't want people in their farm is the bottom line. And so they want, so they don't want the trail to go through their farms. So they want a street detour to they don't care about the train, because if the train goes through, it's like, you're not going to hop off the train to grab a strawberry and then jump on again, right? So that's not going to be a problem, but they don't want a trail there. So if a greenway were built, they tear up the tracks, you're not going to put a trail there because the farmers aren't going to stand for it. And that's why there's a detour planned for some roads. But they can make that a separated bike trail. They can make it protected. It just won't be in that, won't be going through the fields.
Great. Do we know the estimated fare for the Santa Cruz to Watsonville train ride?
No, and there's all kinds of guesses, and people make things up, and they say this is how much it costs in this other place. That in some ways that's a local decision. I mean, like the price of a metro ticket, fare box recovery is a small amount of funding transit, whether it's a bus or a train or whatever. And there's a move afoot in transit planning circles to just say, look, it's such a small amount we get from the fare box, we should just make it free. And we should, I don't mean our train in particular, I mean transit in general. Because if we make it free, then more people will ride it, they'll get out of their cars. It's a public service anyway. And it, it'll build political community support for the transit if it's free. So, I mean, that's the kind of the way transit planning is going right now. That doesn't mean that's what's going to happen here. That's a political decision that as a community we can make. We'd like to make these train tickets super expensive. No, we want to make them super cheap. We want to make it free. We want to make it a discount for the elderly or the students. I mean, there's all kinds of things we could decide, and that's a decision we make as a community.
Great. I'm trying to get to as many as I can.
This is fun.
I know. Light rail is successful in so many areas like Folsom, Sacramento, and Silicon Valley. Why are so many respected people in our community opposing what has been a boon to other communities? Why do people in Santa Cruz not know how much Roaring Camp contributes to this community? They bring fame to this county throughout the world and educate visitors about the redwoods and sandhills habitats.
Yes. Yes, I agree. Yeah, I mean, it is, they have found actually that transit, building it encourages what's called transit-oriented development, which is like walkable communities near transit hubs, where then the transit, think about like, sometimes in a train station, there'll be like a little business that's selling like snacks and selling newspapers. I don't know if there's any newspapers left, but anyway, things like that. And what happens in these transit-oriented communities is near the rail stop, little businesses spring up to be like, drop your dry cleaning off, get your shoes resold, buy a quart of milk, that kind of, so when people are getting off the transit, they can do some business as they walk home. And that it encourages people to have a car-free lifestyle, basically, because they can live near a transit hub. And so it really grows economic development, which is why, say, the Chamber of Commerce in Santa Cruz is opposing the Greenway initiative, the D initiative. It's like, they know it's bad for our economy.
Somebody else says, if Greenway passes, is there any guarantee the Surface Transportation Board will authorize rail banking? And if they don't, what will happen?
That is a really good question. There is no guarantee that the Surface Transportation Board will approve of rail banking, particularly if Roaring Camp and Big Trees Lumber and people who want to use the rail object. It'll be a legal fight, and that'll kind of tear everybody apart for a while and will delay things. But I'm sorry, I got thinking about that and I lost track. What was the other half of that question?
Yeah, I'm sorry. I'm kind of.
Yeah, it's going to be a big legal fight.
I know.
And there's no guarantee they're going to get their way.
Okay. I'm trying to. We have two sides. We have extreme pro trail and extreme pro rail, and I'm trying not
You're
to,
trying to, you're trying to fish around and
trying
get balance in the questions and stuff.
yeah.
Yeah. And I just want to be clear about, like, sometimes this is framed as a trail versus
Yeah.
train thing. And that is not what this is about. There's some people are like, why can't you all compromise? And it's like, the plan of record is the compromise. It says we're not just going to do transit. It says we're not just going to do a trail. We're going to do both. The trail happens first. That is the compromise position. It's like, you create this compromise and it's a community consensus for years. And then somebody comes and stakes out this territory over here. And then suddenly this doesn't look like the compromise anymore because somebody's holding this extreme position that says, your trail isn't good enough for me. It's only good if you tear up the tracks. So it kind of shifts the debate. But I think we have to remember that rail and trail is the compromise.
So I'm going to ask this one more, and then I think what we'll do is we'll wrap up. And then, to be fair, I did not ask every single one, but I tried to be, do a balanced. That I had a bunch of people that were very pro Greenway and a bunch of people who were very anti Greenway, and I was trying to do a little bit more balanced. And I think we could talk later. It is my son's birthday, so I don't want to be on this call forever, but. I think this is a good last question, is just how will northbound and southbound trains pass one another?
Oh, that's fun. So it turns out most rail systems are single track systems. And what they do is they have something called a siding where mostly it's like one track. I want to illustrate this. And then, but when you get to a station, there's two tracks. How do I turn myself to the camera? Okay, so you got two tracks. And so the trains come in from opposite directions and they're standing next to each other in the station. People get on and off the train and then they pass. And so they found that if we put two sidings in between Santa Cruz and Watsonville, we can have regular 30-minute service. And if we put three sidings in, we can get 20-minute service. Basically, the more sidings you put in, the more frequency you can have for your transit. So yeah, single track systems turns out to be the common thing. And just you need a siding occasionally for the trains to pass.
Thank you. Well, I want to really thank Sally and Pauline. And I also want to thank Indivisible for hosting this. I want to thank everybody for being here. I find this issue extremely important. I mean, a little background, my husband started working on the rail trail 20 years ago, and our family a lot of people are avid cyclists. My daughter's an urban planner. We are transportation nerds. I do have a lot of interest in having the train. It's true. But I also, find it very interesting. I know a lot of people who say they're pro Greenway, and I find it, the reason we decided to do this is because I've been involved with different Indivisible projects, and somebody in one of the Indivisible projects said, can't we just put up signs saying support the rail trail? And somebody else said, that's not fair. And that's where we kind of said, we need to start talking about this. This is obviously a divided issue in our county. Yeah. So I'm willing to stay on for a little bit longer if people want to. I don't know how Sally feels. I know Sally's been intensely busy lately. I also want to give people who expected this to be over at 8:30 a chance to sign off if that's what they'd like to do. Mm-hmm. Amanda, do you want to make a comment on what you think would be the best way to handle this? I definitely want to allow many of you to sign off now if you'd like, because we described this as a 7 until 8:30 and conversation.
Thank you. And Pauline might want to have some closing comments too. I feel like I've really dominated.
Well,
yeah, we can
did
wait
a great
minute.
job. No problem.
We can wait a minute and see how many people drop off, and then pick back up for maybe 10 or 15 more minutes.
The after party.
Feel up to it, Sally? I know. Thank you again.
It looks like
I'll leave it up to you. I know you've had a long day.
I'm enjoying this.
It looks like we lost a bunch of people, so we've got a smaller group.
We still have 44 people on, including us.
How many people were on at the top? The
top was 72.
Okay, great.
Wonderful.
Yeah. And we maintained between 60 and 72 for most of it.
Okay.
Yay. No, I think it was a fabulous discussion. I was really, and a bunch of people, it looks like before they signed off said, thank you so much. This is great
Oh.
information. Maximum options, serve the greatest number of locals. Thank you. Thank you. Let's see. Somebody else said commuter rail would connect Davenport to Silicon Valley commuters to the Lux buses that large corporations send all the way to Santa Cruz. They will no doubt go the first mile to connect with commuters. Some shares should be assumed paid by employee transportation benefits. Davenport has been asking for rail service like here in the Davenport Vision Santa Cruz County meeting a year after Measure D passed with 2/3 plus voter approval. And then it says, listen, and it connects to a YouTube channel.
Oh, that's interesting.
I'm
Well,
not
we have the
sure.
tracks. If they want the service, it could happen.
Yeah, so I'm not sure the best way to do that, Amanda. Do you know the best way to?
Well, you should save it out, and I would suggest you copy and paste it out of the chat.
Okay.
And then you can link to it later and watch.
Okay, so I will do that. So I did that. Okay. There's some kind of nasty language, so I'm not going to say that one. Somebody says, can I bring my dog on the train?
That's a local community decision again, whether or not pets will be allowed.
Somebody else says the trail is much wider than 27 feet wide. Where there are bridges, we build new bridges for the trail next to the bridges. RTC note, 25 feet is the absolute minimum needed for a rail with trail system. 96% of the corridor will allow for a 12-foot multi-use trail and 20-foot for rail and future transport options. Segments will be designed and engineered as projects are funded.
Yeah, Barry, I see that comment here. Yeah, Barry is the train man. He knows his engineering and numbers way better than I do. I would believe him.
Somebody else says, why does the RTC continue to fall for obstructionist delay tactics rather than simply build the rail system they've been charged with constructing?
Well, that's an interesting question. The RTC was moving forward. You know, these, as we said, these things are not fast, but they were happening and proceeding. And then and it was driving the opponents of transit nuts. And so they said, what we need to do is we need to change the composition of the RTC. And so what they did was they looked at who is the most powerful, like intelligent leader on this transit project, and let's take him out. And so what they did was they took the executive director of Greenway and they moved him into District 1, the Live Oak neighborhood, and then ran him as a candidate against John Leopold, who was the strong advocate. When you go to a lot of these meetings, you start to realize not everybody did their homework before they came to the meeting, but John always did and knew what was going on. And so they moved him in particularly to take John out because of this transit issue, and they wanted to stop the rail project. But Manu's advertising did, you know, we actually did an analysis of like, well, you know, what was he saying? What was he running on? And he did have some anti-train messaging, but it was about 20% of his ads, and the rest of them were on other issues. So a lot of the community who voted for him may have voted for him because he was anti-train, but some of them may not have even known that and might have voted for him because of other issues. So anyway, they took John Leopold out and they put Manu in his place. He's Manu, the ex-executive director of Greenway. Zach Friend is recused from dealing with this issue because he lives too close to the rail line. So he appointed Rob Quinn, also a Greenway board member, to be his alternate on so he got 2 Greenway votes right there. Then after the election, some of the Greenway people showed up at the RTC meeting crowing about that victory over John Leopold. And they said, basically, we did this to John, we can do it to you. If you keep going for this rail and trail project, we're coming after you next. It was kind of frightening to hear. It was during like the open communications at the beginning of a public meeting when anybody can say what they want. And some people fell into line and said, okay, there had been unanimous votes to move the project forward. And suddenly they were not unanimous anymore. And now we're at a 6-6 stalemate. So that's how we got here and why things haven't been moving for the last year. And so that's where this vote becomes really important. There's a political power in winning an election that then translates into some electeds deciding they're going to go with where the constituents are. And so that's one of the reasons why it's so vital that we win this election. Because even if somebody alluded to all the legal problems that would happen if Greenway passes and they tried to rail bank, I mean, it's going to be a legal mess, but it would be a political disaster.
Somebody else says, if Greenway passes, is there any guarantee the Surface Transportation Board will authorize rail banking? And if they don't, what will happen?
Yeah, that's a really good question. That I don't know. It's going to be a mess. It's going to be a legal mess. And but if they don't authorize the tearing up of the tracks, we're back to the project of record, which is build the trail next to the tracks. And yet there'll be this political concern about, but the people voted to tear up the tracks. I don't know, it's going to be a mess. I don't know.
Somebody else says, I understand train with bus. I understand train with bus will increase bus ridership by 240%. Is this accurate?
I don't know about 240%, maybe. That sounds high. The overall transit ridership is supposed to increase. It was projected to increase 150% for the county. So, I mean, as much as I would like a higher number, I feel like I have to be honest, I think that might be a little high.
Let's see.
But, projections are hard. It's like, that movie where they said, if you build it, they will come. I think it was a baseball field or something. It's like that with transit projects. If you add a lane to the highway, it will fill up with people. That's why adding lanes to highways doesn't reduce congestion. Nothing reduces congestion. People will fill it up. But what a transit does is give you a choice. You can stay in that traffic and sit there if you want, or you can ride faster in a train. You get that option. And so you build a train, people will come. They'll say, that's faster. I'll go there. And so projected ridership, it's the best guess, but like Sonoma was wrong. They projected a certain ridership and it was way higher than that. So you just don't know.
I feel like we have covered most of this. I mean, some people are just saying that they feel strongly one way or another. Mm-hmm. I think we talked about the areas where the trail will have to go off the tracks, too narrow for required 25-foot setback from speeding train. Our central area is only 27-foot wide in Aptos, Capitola, and Harkin Slough. Did we do that one?
We did that one.
Okay. I think I'm trying to see if there's anything. Somebody else says, aren't the trail users, cyclists, going to create a lot more interruptions to vehicular traffic than a tram coming by every 30 minutes?
Yeah, I have to say that the trail, I mean, whether it's the trail only system or the trail with the rail, it's the users of the trail that are slowing things down on the west side. It's like there's this constant stream of pedestrians and dog walkers and joggers and the traffic has, the cars are having to be a lot more cautious. I mean, it slows cars down in the neighborhood, which is safer for everybody, but probably if you're a driver, it's a little annoying. But yeah, exactly. They're going to be a way bigger impediment to the movement of cars than in any kind of trail, whatever it is, than is the train itself that only goes by every 20 minutes.
Somebody else says, haven't rail banked corridors been lost in legal battles already?
I am not exactly sure what that question means. They have been, tracks have been lost for sure, and transit opportunities lost. As far as I know, the corridor itself stays intact as a strip of land. As part of what real banking does is it, keeps that strip of land, because all the people who want to take their land back they go to the federal government and they get money. It's basically a way for people to get money. There's a lawyer who goes around the country when tracts are banked and sues the federal government, kind of gets a class of people who have easements and sues, and he always wins. And, bazillions of dollars have been paid out. And that's, but it gets paid out, and then the corridor itself is preserved, even though you have no tracks anymore and you can't use transit if you've chosen to tear up the tracks, which is usually what they do. There have been a couple of places where they banked the corridor, but because they didn't want to run freight anymore, but they did continue to run passenger rail. But that's really rare and unusual.
Somebody else asked, said, we've been focusing on the rail and trail for the last 20 years. What are the major stalls, considering that Greenway is fairly recent?
Well, I think your husband might be a better person who was involved 20 years ago to be able to answer that. But I think what's interesting is some of the people who are involved in Friends of the Rail and Trail are former RTC employees and directors, and they could again answer this better than I. But I think that part of it is just that it takes so long to get these approvals for all these things to be done. And then, like all those jurisdictions to approve the plan and the Coastal Commission to approve the plan takes a long, long time, which is partly why if we change the plan, it's going to be a super big delay. But also we had those big storms, about 5 years ago. Remember when Valencia Road washed out, and that was out for a long time, and there were some parts of the track that there were washouts and that have to get repaired, and some of those have been repaired and some haven't. But so it also got delayed with then those repairs that had to be made. That it's just kind of act of God.
Somebody else says, is it true that the land with rail is public, but if you rail bank, that property becomes private?
No, I don't think that is true. I think it's still public land owned by the RTC, but it's just what the use of it's going to be is different. I think some people talk about that. Sometimes you'll hear people complain it's privatizing the corridor. They'll use that phrase with describing Greenway. Honestly, I'm a big critic of Greenway, but I don't think that's exactly a fair critique. But I think what they mean by that is that you have to have a private vehicle to use it now. You have to have your private skateboard or bike or e-bike. It's not a public transit corridor anymore. And I think the fact that private landowners are going to get a payout from the federal government is another way where the corridor itself isn't privatized, but there's private profit being made from this process. So I have seen people use that phrase, in complaints about Greenway, and I think that's what they mean. I think it's a little misleading personally.
Okay, Barry Scott clarifies this. He says the Harkin Slough question, the updated plan detours segment 17 to San Andreas Road. So-called segment 17B is required with or without the railroad because of the environmental impacts to wildlife and to agricultural operations. Farmers lose, oh gosh, it's funny when I start reading it, bumps. Farmers lose 200 feet of land to and from any trail they are opposed to.
Yeah, that makes sense. That like even in the slough, I cannot imagine, like, okay, we talked about the toxins in the rail bed and everything, and that when the rail bed was built through the slough 150 years ago, the damage was done. If we keep running a train on it, that doesn't really change the level of impact to the slough. But if you were to tear that rail bed out to build a trail, all that destruction and construction would be a big environmental impact. So I can't imagine it would be allowed. And that's why there is a detour around the slough. And that's why any trail is going to detour. Because again, they're not, I can't imagine they would allow that kind of environmental disruption in a slough today, like they did 150 years ago. But running a train on tracks that already exist, is like, that's just kind of using a previous disruption.
Somebody else says, any potential candidates to run against Koenig?
Maybe they'll come out of Indivisible. Maybe it's somebody on this call.
I was a big John Leopold fan since I was one of the people who started the East Cliff Family Health Center. He was super helpful in Live Oak, so that made me sad. But
Yeah.
maybe I'll end with, I think this is a funny one. Does anyone here tonight think that they will drive forever?
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm meeting people who are like, I can't drive anymore. You know, it's like, I need transit. I'm meeting a lot of interesting people doing this work and they're coming to it from all kinds of perspectives. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much. I think I know in my family, our work is cut out for us. We're going to get involved first with No Way Greenway.
Wonderful.
And eventually with Friends of the Rail Trail. But it seems like the first thing is I feel, I mean, obviously there are different opinions in this county, but I do feel that we need to vote no on Measure D. And then that we can, if that's the way you feel, I think it would behoove you to get involved in putting up signs and talking to people. And I've learned from Sally and also with discussing politics with Trump supporters and people who I don't agree with on other things, I think it's probably best not to try to convince somebody who feels very strongly for Greenway, but at least to talk to people who haven't made up decisions yet. Because there are a lot of people who just say, I just have no idea.
Yeah.
It's so confusing. And that's why we decided to have this.
Thank you so much for hosting this. I'm so pleased. It's been a pleasure to have this conversation. I appreciate your really thinking about how to create a way to bring opponents' voices in without it becoming unpleasant. And I'm, you know, like I said before, you know, when we were planning this, I am so happy to take on those questions. It's just, let's all just take a breath and be courteous.
Exactly.
So, thank you very much.
Well, thank you.
Oh,
And
you did a great job.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Sally. We appreciate it.
Thanks. It's been a ton of fun. If you have any questions, just, you know, give me a call, type me. And I have, and please encourage people to get involved in the campaign because, oh my God, there is so much work to do. So much work.
Good.
Thank you, everybody.
Bye. Good night.
Wonderful rest of your evening.
You too. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you all.
Bye-bye.